Happy Monday, everyone. That's right. I have my voice back, which is nice, especially for the job that I have. So this week, we kick off the Security Weekly Network on this Monday with Matt Alderman and I interviewing Sharon Goldberg. She's the CEO and co-founder of Commonwealth Crypto and an associate professor at Boston University. After that, we're going to air a pre-recorded interview, or actually a segment that Matt Alderman and I did when we sat down at DEF CON and talked about our process for interviewing vendors, conducting briefings, and doing interviews, and how you can use some of that information to evaluate vendors in information security. Stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Business Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Brought to you by today's determined attackers easily bypass even the most advanced network defenses. Trying to ramp up staff to detect their backdoors can cost thousands of dollars and take months, even years. With Active Countermeasures AI Hunter, we enable junior analysts to detect even the most advanced backdoors in a matter of hours. Sign up for a demo and purchase our product today by visiting activecountermeasures.com/BSW. Active Countermeasures. Make every analyst a hunter. Are you getting pressure to improve your data security? Would you like a faster, easier, better way to patch? Then you need to check out Automox. Automox is a cloud-native platform that patches and manages every endpoint, even remote servers and devices, including Windows, Mac, Linux, and third-party software from a single dashboard. Improve your cyber hygiene, reduce your attack surface, and save 90% of the effort you spend patching. Automox, your patching system of record. Do you have a website, an external presence, employees, an office? Any of these things can be compromised and attacked. How are you defending your assets? Have you penetration tested your public assets? Start 2018 by taking a proactive approach to securing your vulnerable areas. Black Hills Information Security has been helping companies find their weaknesses since 2008. Email consulting at blackhillsinfosec.com and see how they can help you sleep better at night. Welcome, everyone, to episode 96 of Business Security Weekly for August 20th, 2018. I'm, of course, your host, Paul Asadorian, coming at you from G-Unit Studios back here in Rhode Island. On the lines via Skype, Mr. Matt Alderman is here with us. Matt, welcome.
Always a pleasure. 3 weeks in a row, you and I get to be together.
That's right. Yeah, Michael's on a bit of hiatus for a number of reasons. So Matt and I are covering Business Security Weekly in the meantime. Mike will be back in the saddle again. I don't know when the dates are. I think it's a little closer to September. Mike will be back. So don't worry. Those of you that miss Michael, we miss him too. He'll be back. But it's nice to have you, Matt. Matt and I spent a lot of time together at Black Hat and covering shows recently. And you'll see in the segment following this one, there'll be where Matt and I talk about our process for conducting basically briefings with vendors and trying to get to the real facts about what the vendor actually does and what problems they solve, and how we attempt to do that basically here on Security Weekly. And you can take some of those tips and use them in your own discovery process for vendors. We do have a webcast coming up. Oh, yes, with Javelin Networks, of course, titled How to Get Attackers to Contain Themselves, which is airing on August 30th from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time. It'll be myself and Joff Thayer. You can go to securityweekly.com/Javelin. It's Javelin, and sign up today. Javelin is a fantastic partner of ours working in the Active Directory security space, helping you secure your Active Directory environment. And I think they do a really good job at it. I mean, I'm biased. They're a sponsor, right? But the reason they're a sponsor is because we met them 2 years ago at InfoSec World, and I was like, "You're doing what?" I was like, "That's kind of impressive." So we're doing a webcast with them. They've always got fantastic content to share. securityweekly.com/Javelin. All righty. And now I would like to welcome back, Sharon was on a different show on Paul's Security Weekly a while ago, and now she makes a return to Business Security Weekly. Sharon is, I don't know how any other way to say this, Sharon, other than like you're really, really smart. I want our audience to make sure they realize that. I realized that firsthand the last time you came on the show. I was like, wow, Sharon is like so much smarter than I am. And you're back here talking about blockchain and telling us about your new startup. And I'm really excited. Sharon, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much for having me back. The last show was really fun, so I'm looking forward to this one.
Absolutely. So, Sharon, we were talking earlier about blockchain, and basically, I think that there is this kind of misconceptions, I think, about blockchain. I think a lot of vendors in our space are using the word, and they don't really know what it means. And there's a lot of CISOs and senior executives that are like, what is this? How does this blockchain thing fit into my role as a CISO? So why don't we start with a little bit of background about blockchain and how it's been used a little bit, and then maybe transition into some of the business cases.
Yeah, so I think if you're a security person, I think the best way to think about a blockchain is just a public ledger. Okay, so it's this magical thing, really, that just allows you to record something in an append-only log. So you have an item, you record it, you record the next item, you record the next item, you record the next item. And the guarantee that you have in this blockchain is that you can't erase anything. Okay, so you can just keep adding to it, but you can't erase. And that gives you a security property because it allows you to log things in a non-erasable way. So that's really the first important piece of what a blockchain should do. If your blockchain doesn't do that, it's not a very good blockchain. Now, when I just said you can't erase, the question is who can't erase, right? And so what was the amazing innovation in Bitcoin that came out in 2009 and basically took kind of the world like 3 years to figure out even what it was in the first place, was the idea that there wasn't a single authority deciding what could be recorded in this blockchain, in this log. Okay, so instead of saying that we're going to have like a trusted bank or a government or a central bank or like a company called whatever taking charge of this and keeping track of what's in the log, we would have some distributed way, some decentralized way of knowing who, of ceding the responsibility of who keeps what's in this log. Okay, so in the Bitcoin world, the people who are actually doing the logging are Bitcoin miners. And you've probably heard about, people building mining farms next to waterfalls in Quebec, things like that, right? All of those computers are sitting there basically competing to decide what goes into the log. That's the Bitcoin model of blockchain, right? It's called proof of work. So basically, the more work you do, the more say you have into what goes into the log.
Oh,
and work is just basically, it's just burning power.
Sure.
So that's why
was Bitcoin the first most popular implementation of a blockchain? That's the way I typically associate. Is that correct?
Bitcoin was the breakthrough. Bitcoin was huge scientific breakthrough in computer science and in cryptography. And before Bitcoin, nobody had any idea how to do this in a permissionless model. So before Bitcoin, we had things like Byzantine agreement or Byzantine fault tolerance, which is like we have 20 authorized parties and they cooperate together to produce, let's say, a log or to agree on something. And then you have guarantees that say, like, if only 1/3 of the parties are malicious, then the log will be correct, things like that. That's a permissioned model in which, in order to participate in like deciding what goes into the log, you need to have permission ahead of time. So that means like someone has to give you permission. Who is that person? Well, that's the setup. And that creates like this chicken and egg problem. Like, who are these people that are making the decisions? The thing with Bitcoin that's amazing is that there is no person who decides who can become a miner. Like, you just buy some mining equipment, plug it into the wall, and then you can be a miner. I could be a miner. I wouldn't have a lot of mining power, but anyone could be a miner. So that was the amazing thing about Bitcoin. It was this ability to agree on this log that was permissionless. You didn't need to have permission in order to participate. So that's like, to me, the huge breakthrough in Bitcoin. That said, there are technologies now that are called blockchains, like Hyperledger, which use a permissioned model, right? So where you would participate in the logging, but only with permission from the setup. So I've seen things like, I saw this really interesting talk. I think it was from Walmart. Don't quote me on that, but it was really fascinating. They were tracking mangoes through the supply chain. So it was like this mango blockchain, and the parties that were participating in the logging of where the mangoes were going, they were permissioned. So basically, you had to be like on the supply chain for mango transport in order to participate in this blockchain. So there are kind of like in the blockchain world, you'll hear this two kinds of like permissioned and permissionless blockchain. If you're like a cryptographer like me, like you'll be very excited about the permissionless blockchain and you'll feel like that's the only true blockchain.
Right.
You may find people that will go to the permissioned, like you have to be authorized to participate in order to decide what goes into the log kind of blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
And that's making a lot of inroads also, and particularly in the corporate world in the bigger companies.
And now, when we talk about the log, if it's a permissionless environment, how is there control over like who has how many mangoes or who has that much currency, right?
Yeah. Okay, so this is the tricky part, and this is like, this is like what it took me personally like 2 years to understand how this thing works. So it's actually pretty tricky why this works. So the idea is they have this log and there's this log of events, right? And so what people do is they try to get events into the log. These events are called transactions in Bitcoin, so I'll just call them transactions. The reason in Bitcoin they're called transactions because they record the movement of Bitcoins from one user to another.
Mm-hmm.
But we have all these transactions and we want to get them into the blockchain. And so what users will do is they'll submit transactions to the miners, right, to the nodes that are participating in forming the blockchain. And then the nodes will mine those transactions and try to get them onto the blockchain. So what that actually means is if I'm a miner, I'll get a bunch of transactions, I'll hear a bunch of them, I'll pick some of them. Usually I pick the ones that pay me the most fees. So they're usually associated with a fee. So whoever pays me more is more likely to get into the block that I'm mining. So I'll pick a bunch of transactions and then I will try to add them to the blockchain. Okay. And trying to add them to the blockchain essentially basically amounts to trying to win the lottery. Like you're basically picking a random number, trying to see if your random number is the winning ticket over and over and over again. So the more computers, the more electricity, the more machines you have, the more tickets you can buy, right? You just keep picking and picking and picking. And at the end of the day, someone will actually, not at the end of the day, but like at some point, one of the miners will actually find a winning ticket, present their transactions and the winning ticket to the rest of the nodes, and that block will be added to the blockchain and everyone will move on.
That's the best explanation I've ever heard for it by far.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, because you see these miners, right? And we've seen some interesting hacks of going after these miners. Now I kind of understand why, right? Is because they're trying to create some legitimacy into the blockchain. They have all this computing power, so if you can get one of these miners' accounts, I mean, I guess it's good.
Yep, you can bias
but it also. Yeah.
That's exactly what we were studying in one of our papers. So basically, yeah, if you can like control what transactions these miners see, right? You get to tell him what transaction he should see and what transaction he doesn't. You can kind of control what goes into the blockchain. So you could give him all these transactions that are somehow favorable to you. If you can control his view of the world, then you can control what he's going to push into the blockchain. You can control what actually goes into the blockchain, right? And I've actually studied this specific topic. It's called eclipse attack.
Yeah, and I'm curious about the you talked about a third of the transactions or could be malicious but still trust the blockchain. Where does this balance between legitimate and maybe malicious transactions, how does that impact or not impact the blockchain and the whole concept of Bitcoin? Is there a ratio? Is there concern there because it is so permissionless in the case of Bitcoin?
Yeah, so, okay, so in the permissioned model, we have very, very strong bounds on how many parties can be malicious and for things to still work. I'm not prepared to state the bounds at this specific second, but it's something over 3. But in the permissionless model, there's not as strong bounds. The bounds are different. In the permissioned model, like where you have like 20 people that are allowed to participate in the blockchain, then we know very clearly like how many people have to be honest, how many people don't have to be honest. There's like many, many years, over 2 decades worth of computer science research to try to understand this question. If you want to read like the first paper on this, it's a Byzantine generals problem by Lamport, and it's sometime in the late 70s or 80s, I don't remember. So it's like a long, long time ago people were thinking about this. Computer science years, long, long ago. But when the permissionless model, it's really much more hazy exactly what the limits are. So people often talk about a 51% attack on blockchains. Have you heard about that? 51% attacks. So what that means is that if you have more than 51% of what they call the mining power, what that means is just how much of the share of lottery tickets you can pick relative to everyone else. So let's say I can pick 51% of the lottery tickets and everybody else can pick 49. So I can really influence the blockchain. And so because I have more than half of the computing power, I'm going to win more than half of the time. But that's not really like a hard bound on how much you can skew what goes into the blockchain, right? It just basically means you're going to win more than half the time. But for blockchain people, we think a lot about the 51% attack. To me personally, I don't think it's that meaningful to think about exactly like this threshold or that threshold. But when you do start to see, when you do start to see a large number of computing resources held by a single miner, then it is worrying. And if you're following the blockchain space, you will see that that is the case in some in certain blockchains. And so, for instance, like there's very, very powerful mining players in the Bitcoin space. One of them is Bitmain, very well-known miner that has a ton of computing power and therefore has a ton of influence, right? So if you control most of the computing power, which is not, it's not to say that they have most, but they do have a lot. And there are other parties that have a lot too, certainly more than like what Sharon Goldberg at home in her, with her one little miner is going to have. Then they can have an influence on what goes into the blockchain. But we don't have such a clear like number of this is where things turn terrible. I also want to say that people initially were thinking about 51% attacks, which is just like I have more than half of the mining power, and so therefore I have a lot of control, like more than half of the control. There has been a lot of work debunking that 51 is really the threshold. The threshold more looks like in the 20%, 30% range, because there are strategies that are very clever and not obvious that you can do if you're a miner that wants to gain more of the mining power. So one example is called selfish mining. So really interesting research result from 2013, I think. That shows that even if you have less than 51% of the mining power, you can have the same effect as if you had 51% of the mining power. So they're kind of all better attacks that you can do. What I want to say, though, about this space that's really interesting is that there's a lot of incentives for people to behave well that are sort of outside the system. So think about Bitcoin. Let's say I am Bitmain and I'm mining Bitcoins. And this is extremely profitable for me. We didn't talk about profitability yet, and I'll tell you why it's profitable if you're a miner. It's profitable because every block that you mine, every time you win the lottery, you get compensated with Bitcoins. And I think it's 12.5 Bitcoins that you get compensated with for every block that you win. And so 12.5 Bitcoins, let's imagine that Bitcoin is worth around 10K, whatever it is at the specific instant, maybe 6K, I don't know. But multiply that by 12.5, that's what you get for getting a single block. So the more you mine, the more Bitcoins you get, right? So you're actually getting paid in Bitcoins in order to be a miner. And what's really interesting about this is that people kind of worry about miners misbehaving. But if you think about it, miners are getting paid in the coin that they're mining. And so if they undermine the system, if they attack the system and the system loses trust and loses value in the marketplace, then they've attacked themselves.
That's fascinating.
Right? And so there's this interesting cycle.
So it's $6,456.07 right now, because I just looked it up. So you're talking about close to $80,000 to win a lottery. I mean that's a huge amount of money.
And there's one every 10 minutes. So you're doing it every 10 minutes, and so this is what they're competing over. You can make a lot of money being a miner.
So essentially, Sharon, I'm sure the way I understand is the blockchain technology. Is primarily what we're talking about in the transactional sense is currency, right? But it's really a way to anonymously and then publicly validate a transaction. Is that close?
It's not anonymous.
Not truly anonymous, right? Yeah.
It is not anonymous at all, actually. So the closest you're going to get to this is pseudonymous, but I really think that the privacy issue is a total red herring here. Okay, we have blockchains like the Zcash blockchain that's really focused on privacy. The Bitcoin blockchain, for instance, initially when the first paper came out about Bitcoin, the Satoshi white paper in 2009, there was a claim of an anonymity in there, but it was really debunked very quickly, 3 or 4 years later. The idea here is not to make things private necessarily. The first idea in blockchain is to make things immutable or unchangeable. You have this unchangeable log of transactions that no one can delete from. Where the no one is determined by the mining process. So assuming that the mining process is working properly, then no one can actually take things back, roll things back. And so that means that if the blockchain says that Sharon gave Paul 1 Bitcoin, this is really helpful because if I gave you 1 Bitcoin and you gave me like, I don't know, let's say I gave you 3 Bitcoins and you gave me a car, okay? I can't like then go roll back the blockchain, take back my Bitcoin, and then I get to keep the car, right? So you can actually use this as a system of payments. And that's really the first use case. And that's what Bitcoin brought to the forefront, which was cryptocurrency, a system of payments. It's really just, I'm going to log that I paid Paul this many Bitcoin, and then he's going to give me a car, and he's going to trust that like he's given me this car and he's actually got the log of his of the transaction. I won't be able to go and say like, oh, I never paid Paul, sorry.
Right.
So I get to keep my 3 Bitcoins and the car that you gave me.
Sharon, I have to ask you, because you mentioned Satoshi. Does it frustrate you that like we really truly don't know who made this, what you described as one of the greatest breakthroughs in computer science? Does it frustrate you that we really don't know who it was?
No, not in the least.
Okay.
Not
Good.
in the
I'm glad.
least. You know what? Actually, I think so. There's a lot of discussion about this in the community, and I follow this prescription is that there's a lot of these sort of like figures in the blockchain space that are very well known, and they have their, there's a blockchain associated with this particular person, and they're kind of like the forefront of that. And then you look at Bitcoin, and there's no spokesperson, there's no person who you kind of know is like, this is the Bitcoin person. There's just no such person. And I think it's just really fantastic and amazing that we have this.
It fits
this
the
sort
model
of like
of
really distributed. Yeah.
Sure.
It's really amazing.
You know the miners. I think you know some of the big miners, but you don't necessarily have a big spokesperson.
No, you don't. It's not like certain blockchains that do have like a specific kind of person standing in front of them. But I think it's just because the industry is really young, and there's a lot of work to be done to make people understand what's going on. And so you see these type of characters coming, like emerging and like educating people, and like this is how it works, and people kind of glom onto that. And I think it's sort of natural given the youth of the industry. But I have no idea who Satoshi is. I don't care. But whoever it was a genius.
Yeah,
so
I like I like your attitude. I can respect that. It actually helped bring some closure to it for me as well. So thank you for that. So when we talk about blockchain outside of currency, what are some of the other use cases potentially for this technology that I think you've done a great job of describing thus far?
Yeah. So I want to first talk about currency, because actually that's what my startup is working on.
Sure.
So give me 30 seconds to talk about currency.
Go for it.
And then we can move on to other stuff. So first of all, I think the most used use case today is currency. And you can see that in these markets for trading these cryptocurrencies. And so, what we're actually doing is we're looking at ways of trading across different types of cryptocurrencies. So I've been talking a lot about Bitcoin. I'm a little bit like an old person in this space, is that I've been in this space for like 5 years, which is like considered to being a dinosaur. And back when I started, there was only Bitcoin. And so I'm very fond of Bitcoin.
Sure.
But there are a lot of other currencies that have kind of popped up in the last years. There's just hundreds of them right now, and people are trading them. And so there's an active market for trading these currencies. And one of the things that we're looking at, which is, I think, very interesting, is how do you securely trade these currencies? Because today what's happening in this market is that the way that people are trading it is very old-fashioned to the way they would trade any other kind of security, like a stock or a foreign currency or something like this. So the whole idea that there's like a blockchain here behind the currencies is not being used to allow for trading the currencies. And so what we're trying to do is allow people to trade the currencies without having to just basically trust whatever central bank or whatever has popped up, which is sort of antithetical to the idea of having these distributed currencies. So I think that's one really interesting model.
Well, yeah, cool. That's interesting, because you're right. There is a validation process built into each and every currency, and when you trade between them, like you said, you're not using that, and it sounds like your startup is going to try and tie those validation strategies between the currencies, correct?
Right. Yeah.
So it's kind of
like
blockchain. Yeah. So if I can describe it just quickly, right? It's leveraging blockchain to help trade blockchain-based cryptocurrencies.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Good job,
yes.
Matt.
Okay.
Thank you. And a lot of, the technology that we have now for trading this stuff doesn't really use the blockchain in any meaningful way. It just really just kind of, I take my currency, I give it to someone else, I give custody to someone else, and then I can do trading once that other party has custody of my coins. And this is not really necessary because there's actually a blockchain that's controlling who has which coin. So why don't we use the blockchain as the custodian as opposed to just some third party that we trust, which is the same way that we would trade like, dollars for yen or stocks or something like that. And today we're in the kind of like the dollars for yen or stock model for the way that trading is happening. So we're thinking of new ways to do cryptocurrency trading.
That's awesome.
That's sort of one application. I already mentioned another, which was the Mangoes on the blockchain application, which I think is really interesting because it's the supply chain model is really interesting. And I think that people like me kind of go back and forth about what this is really doing, because in a way, you're going from a world in which some of the supply chain stuff is just not even recorded on computers at all. Like we had the guy who gave the Mangoes on the blockchain talk, which obviously had a huge impression on me. He was saying that like they had no idea where these mangoes come from, and there can be outbreaks of food poisoning and things, and no one has any idea where the mangoes came from. So the entire world just stops eating mangoes for a while, right? It wouldn't be good if we knew that these were like mangoes from New Zealand from this specific farm, and that's why we should stop eating mangoes from this farm. But all the other mangoes are still okay, right? So they don't even have an ability to like track at all where things came from. So it sounds like they just need a database, right? There's nothing like that has to be a blockchain here. So people kind of go back and forth on this supply chain model. Like, do we even need a blockchain? Can I just use like a centralized database? Can I just like set up an SQL database and use this to track mangoes? Maybe you can. On the other hand, maybe you don't want to trust the central party who's logging this SQL database for you. Maybe you would rather have a say into like what's getting logged into the database. And so that's what a blockchain allows you to do. You basically, if I'm a Mango supplier, a Mango middleman, I can become one of the miners that authorizes blocks. And so I can have a say into what's going into the database. And I'm not worried that there's someone who might be, biasing this blockchain in their own, to their own benefit. So I'm not sure. I don't understand the supply chain case, well enough to say what's really going on there. But you hear a lot of applications where it sounds like all you need is a database. And they're using just the blockchain as a database. But then there may be reasons that the blockchain is a better model of a database because you don't have a central trusted party and people don't want to have a central trusted party. Right. So that's like another example.
Yeah, it seems like there's a very much like a social aspect to it. It kind of goes above and beyond technology.
Yeah, it's about trust.
Yeah.
It's 100% about trust. So it's basically all it is at the end of the day is a log. It's just a log. That's it. There's lots of ways I can log stuff. You know what? I could be your trusted logger. You could send me all your requests and I'll just log them for you and you'll have a log. And that's fine. But are you willing to trust me to make that log for you? That's the real question. And so if you're not, that's where blockchain comes in. It's just a question of.
So if we think about things like international trade and international distribution transportation, where you have lots of parties involved, is blockchain a better way to decentralize controlling that log versus having one central authority?
Exactly. That's what it's all about. That's the core idea. And that's when people talk about decentralization, that's what they're talking about in the blockchain space. And I could talk for like an hour about how I feel about decentralization or not decentralization. But at the end of the day, which if you want me to, I totally will. But at the end of the day, it's just about like, who do you trust to make this log for you? That's what the blockchain is. It's just a log and you have to trust someone to do it for you.
No, that's certainly helpful. Now, but we can trust the log as long as there's no vulnerabilities or bugs in the blockchain. And you had told us before that I think it was in Ethereum that you had found some kind of bug or vulnerability, correct?
Yeah. So it's really fascinating at the end of the day when you look at like, we can talk about security models all we want, right? But at the end of the day, it's all code and it has to be correct and there can't be flaws, right? And so, one nice thing about blockchain systems is almost all of them are open source. Like if you had a blockchain that wasn't open source, it would look really strange. I don't know how to even think about that. So let's assume they're all open source so you can look at them. They're written by humans and those humans have their own incentives at play, right? There's been like crazy stories of like, here's a crazy story. Like there was a cryptocurrency exchange that was managing, all sorts of different kinds of cryptocurrencies and like Bitcoin and Ethereum and all the big ones. And then there was like some little one in there that they had they had as a currency they were supporting, and basically the code base for that currency was hacked, and like basically a backdoor was put into the node that runs that cryptocurrency, node, and that node started attacking the cryptocurrency exchange and like stealing money from there. So basically, someone took over some little currency that no one cared about and turned it into malware, and it started attacking the exchange. So you can have vulnerabilities in blockchains, and they're well-known examples of vulnerabilities in blockchains. We've found several of them over the course of my research outside of the company. We had one in February on Ethereum, and that was just about looking at how so the blockchain is created by a bunch of nodes, right? So they're computers, and they like all decide what the blockchain is. Each one of these computers stores a copy of the actual blockchain, like the actual log. So if I'm running like a Bitcoin node, I'm going to use a whole bunch of memory to actually store Bitcoin log from the starting point of Bitcoin up until now. It's kind of insane if you think about it. So I'm holding the entire Bitcoin log from the beginning of time, according to Bitcoin, on my machine. And these nodes, they communicate with each other through a peer-to-peer network. So I have a copy of the blockchain, you have a copy of the blockchain. I need to learn new blocks from you, and I need to see what the state of the blockchain is, and we all need to communicate. So how do they actually do that? They use a peer-to-peer networking protocol. And we looked at the peer-to-peer networking protocol that Bitcoin uses back in 2015, and we found vulnerabilities there. So we found ways of making the protocol for the peer-to-peer network stronger and less likely to be attacked. The kind of attacks you would worry about is like, this is a miner, and I get to control its entire view of the blockchain. So I get to stop it from talking to anyone but my nodes. And my nodes are feeding it all malicious transactions or transactions that are in my favor. So I want to make sure that it's not possible for a node to be completely isolated by an attacker. And we found some flaws in Bitcoin that were fixed. So the Bitcoin network is a lot stronger now than it was in 2015 before we looked at it. But when we looked at Ethereum, we found like even more crazy flaws. So what we found was that if you were running like just a machine, you didn't need a lot of IP addresses. You didn't need any special network position. You could just start up a machine. You could basically find a node and surround it, make all its connections to your machine from any remote machine on the internet. There was no sort of like requirement that you had a lot of networking resources to do that, which in Bitcoin, we found that you could only do these kinds of attacks if you had thousands of IP addresses under your control. Or like you had a botnet. With our Ethereum attack, we did it with 2 computers with just one IP address each. So a total of 2 IPs. It was because they forgot to put IP address restrictions on the peer-to-peer network connection protocol. And so they're there now, but they weren't there before we looked at that in February. So like Ethereum was operating from its first day up until like 2.5 years later with no IP restrictions on the peer-to-peer network connections. So that's just like an example of the types of flaws that you'll find in these protocols. And then, what that says to security researchers is just, it's really interesting because there's a lot of sort of action. Even my company, we're building on top of these blockchains. We're not like looking into the guts of the blockchains, which is what I do when I'm wearing my, BU computer science professor hat on. Like, let's look at the guts of these and see what's broken and find vulnerabilities. There's a lot of work on building on top of them. And so when you actually go look into the guts of the protocols, you can find all sorts of things.
Yeah, Sharon, you were saying earlier, like a lot of people rushed out to create their own currency, right? Like maybe in vain, like I want to have Paul's currency, yay! But building on top of them is probably more productive for a lot of the goals that you want to accomplish, correct?
Yeah, so there's kind of different things that people are doing. So in terms of like, I want to build my own currency, there are kind of 2 ways that people are doing it. One is I'm really going to go build my own blockchain. I'm just going to start from scratch. And I have a lot of friends from academia who are actually starting their own blockchains from scratch. So one example is Zcash, that was started by a variety of people, including people, people from academia that I've known for a long time. So that was like, we're going to have our own blockchain. It's going to have privacy. It's going to be much more private than Bitcoin. This is not something we can build on top of Bitcoin. And it's completely new. And then there are things like people call them tokens, ERC20 tokens. So the most popular way of issuing like Paul's own currency, like if you wanted to have like a security weekly coin, for example,
that'd be fun.
is you'd probably, you can ICO and see how much money you guys make. So basically what you would do is you would basically follow a standard of how do you build a currency on top of Ethereum. And that standard is called ERC20. And that's what the majority of, new coins are doing. But there's still a minority of like people who are coming out with like, this is my new blockchain and this is how it's going to work.
Right.
Completely new.
So
there's
Sharon,
sort of the two.
tell me a little bit about your startup. Do you have funding? Like, where are you with your startup? I'm curious.
Yeah, so we started it in July of last year. So we're a month and a year in. We started fundraising in September. We ended up raising our seed round in December. So we've had basically an engineering team since January. So basically just 2018 is how long we've been building stuff. And we are building a system for non-custodial cryptocurrency trading that we're now partnering with a couple of exchanges to test at their exchange. So basically the idea is if you're a cryptocurrency trader and you want to trade on one of the exchanges that's our partner, what you would do is you would go through our software, and that would allow you to trade on that exchange without having to trust that exchange with your cryptocurrency. So the idea is you can still trade on the exchange, use all of their liquidity, their pricing, have access to their order book, all of the other users and counterparties that are there, but you wouldn't have to actually deposit your coins at that centralized exchange. You wouldn't have to give control of your cryptocurrency to the centralized exchange. Instead, you would keep control of the coins yourself. And in fact, what you're doing is you're really giving the blockchain the ability to protect your coins.
And
so we're building the technology.
But that's a big problem if you're into all of the cryptocurrencies. You're solving a problem that I would have if I'm using all of these currencies, right? In a very big way and appealing to that audience, right?
Right. So today, you would have several options for how you might do this. One is you might trust an exchange with your coins and then very quickly move your coins off of that exchange. When you're done trading, but that means that you're not able to kind of trade with them very quickly because moving the coins on and off will take a long time. It takes hours kind of time scales. So if there's a trading opportunity that you've lost because you've moved things off of the exchange. And then the other thing is just even certain exchanges, like maybe you don't want to trust them with your coins at all. They're just, you don't know them well enough. You don't believe they're trustworthy enough, but you still want to trade there because the prices are good. So we're providing the ability to do that sorts of trading. And then the third point is that, what's happening in the industry is people are converging to ways that they are comfortable storing their cryptocurrency. So one place to store it is what's called a hardware wallet. And it looks, basically, a lot of them just look like USB sticks with little screens on them. And that's where the secret keys for your cryptocurrencies live. And so some people are comfortable storing their cryptocurrency on these hardware wallets. And so if you were to use our technology, you can continue to kind of store your coins inside your hardware wallet while still trading on exchanges, rather than having to just give your coins up to the exchange while you're trading and then put them back in the wallet when you're done. That's awesome. And there's sort of a whole kind of like set of technologies, which are called custody technologies. So you could be your hardware wallet. It could be a software wallet like on your phone. It could be something like Coinbase, which is supposed to be a trusted custodian for a lot of people. So there are places where people do want to keep their currency,
right?
And maybe it's not cryptocurrency exchanges. So we want to still allow people to trade without having to actually move their coins out of the places that they trust.
That's fantastic.
That's the idea.
Matt, any more questions for Sharon?
No, that was the best Bitcoin / blockchain explanation I've ever heard.
Yes, I concur. Sharon, thank you so much for appearing on the show. And if people want to learn more about your startup, where can they go? I know we put some links to some of your blog posts in the show notes as well, but your website?
www.commonwealthcrypto.com, or you can just Google me, Sharon Goldberg, and you'll find my link to Commonwealth Crypto.
Awesome.
So thank you.
Sharon, thank you so much.
Thank you.
With that, we're going to take a short break and air a pre-recorded interview that Matt and I did at DEF CON. Stay tuned.